Okay, Exodus chapter 8. We're going to continue looking at the plagues. Remember last week we talked about the first plague, and more than that, we talked about the reasons for the plagues. You remember the reasons that God has sent in the plagues upon the nation of Egypt, because he could have just simply caused Pharaoh to allow the children of Israel to leave, but he doesn't because the children of Israel need to experience these plagues as much as the nation of Egypt and Pharaoh do. But recall the reasons that God is doing or performing these plagues for them. Number one, it was to reintroduce himself to his children, to the nation of Israel. Remember back in chapter 3, Moses is standing in front of the burning bush, and God says, I want you to go free the children, my children from Egypt. And Moses says, well, who are you? And he says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Moses even goes further and says, well, who do I say is sending me? And God says, I am that I am. I'm the self-existent one. I'm the only one, in essence, is what he's saying. And he said, this will be my name that you will know me with throughout the generations. This will be perpetually my name that you will know me as. It's Jehovah. I am that I am. So he's reintroducing himself to the nation of Israel because they had been in Egypt for 430 years. They had started to even follow some of the Egyptian gods. Later through in the scripture, we're told that they were going back to the gods that they followed in Egypt, right? So he wants to reintroduce the nation of Israel to himself. He's reintroducing himself to the nation of Israel as their personal God. Number two, he even states this in the early part of chapter 7, I believe verse 5 or so, where he says the reason is that he is going to introduce himself to Pharaoh. Because remember, when Moses went to Pharaoh initially and says, Pharaoh, let the people of God sent me. He wants you to let the people go 3 days into the wilderness to have a sacrifice for him, to worship him. And Pharaoh says, who is this God? Who is Jehovah? I don't know Jehovah. So, okay, God says, I'll tell you who I am. I'll show you who I am. I'll introduce myself to you, not only to you, Pharaoh, but to the nation of Egypt. And we see, as we will see, when the nation of Israel comes out of Egypt, there's a lot of Egyptians that are now following the God of the Israelites, Jehovah, because of the plague. So part of the reason he's doing his plagues is to introduce himself to the nation of Egypt as well and to Pharaoh. But I think above all of those other reasons, the reason that God does this is something that we touched on last week, because each of the 10 plagues that God is going to send upon the Egyptians is a direct challenge to one or more of the major gods of the Egyptians, those gods that the Israelis or the children of Israel had started to believe in, that they had started to serve, right? So God is going to, for once and for all, show the children of Israel that, yes, indeed, he is God and these others are false. These others are simply false idols. So he has to disabuse them of their notion that he's one among many. So the 10 plagues are primarily designed to show the nation of Israel, no, I am that I am. I am the self-existent one. I'm the all-eternal, powerful one, not these things. And so that's what we talked about last week with the flood. With the turning the water into blood. Remember, we talked about the 3 gods that affected. Osiris, it was thought that he died every year when the Nile flood came, and it was tinged red, and the people said that's Osis's bloodletting, and it's bringing new life and all of that. And then Khnum, hey, out. Well, they wanted to share the same space in the floor, apparently. Okay. Khnum, which he was the spirit of the Nile. He was the god of the Nile, right? And Hapi was another one of the gods of the Nile. And so by doing that, God took those things, and they had different gods of the different fishes and all of that stuff. So the fish died, and what normally brought life was now bringing death. That was the essence of the first plague, turning the Nile and the waters into blood. It was to defeat their idea that those gods had anything to do with anything, that they were nothing, basically. We're going to see the same things today. We're going to talk about the second, third, and fourth plague. So let's go ahead and read a little bit, and we'll talk about each of these individually, because there's some interesting stuff here in these plagues, and we're probably all familiar with them, but let's go ahead and read them. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedrooms and on your bed and in the houses of your servants and your people and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and all your servants.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt.' So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up by the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, 'Plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go sacrifice to the Lord.' Moses said to Pharaoh, 'Be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and left only in the Nile.' And he said, 'Tomorrow.' Moses said, 'Be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your houses and your servants and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile.' So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs as he agreed with Pharaoh, and the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them, as the Lord had said." Frogs were a manifestation of Hekek, who was the wife of Khnum. These are some of the major gods of Egypt. Like I said, they had 80 gods, 90 gods. Some scholars now think they had many more than that, but a lot of them were minor gods over specific things. These were major gods. These were the pantheon of the Egyptian god mythology, if you will. Hekek and Khnum were responsible for creating people. The Egyptians believed that Khnum on his potter's wheel would form children out of the clay and the dirt and form children, and Hekek would bring them life. She would breathe life into them. She was a fertility god. She was often pictured with the body of a woman and the head of a frog, or simply as all of a frog, because to the Egyptians, a frog was a very sacred animal. Matter of fact, they were forbidden from harming a frog. You couldn't kill a frog. If you killed a frog, even inadvertently, sometimes that can mean the death sentence. If you killed them on purpose, you were being put to death, because they looked at the frogs and considered the frogs and believed that the frogs were miraculous because of what we know today is very simple biology, that the frog lays its eggs and the eggs turn into tadpoles, which is the larval stage of a frog, and they grow in the water, and when they're full grown, they change and they begin to breathe air, so they come out on the land. But to the Egyptians, this was magical. These were animals that could live both in the water and in the land. They appeared at the end of the flood season, right? So when the Nile flooded back in those days, that's what caused the Nile Delta, and that flood every year renewed the land. It brought all the nutrients down floating from it, and it would cover the delta. And when it would recede, they had learned and seen that the frogs had laid tadpoles in those flooded areas around the edges of the Nile. And so when the Nile receded miraculously, there pop up a bunch of frogs. So frogs signified to them life. And it was signified by Hekek, the frog goddess. She was the actual giver of life to the Egyptian people. All the new children were formed on her husband's pottery wheel, and she would breathe in the breath of life. She was thought to be the god that accompanied childbirth. She was there to witness and protect those ladies who were giving birth to their children. So notice something that we need to notice about these things. The first two plagues, Pharaoh's priest and the false priest could replicate them. But did you notice something very interesting? Why didn't Pharaoh ask his priest to reverse the curse that God had brought on him? They couldn't get rid of the frogs. They couldn't turn the blood back into water. They could only replicate and imitate what God was doing through Moses. That's the same thing that Satan does. He can only imitate what God has done. That's why he spends his whole time trying to imitate and corrupt the things of God, because he cannot change them. Right? That's what we see in the book of Revelation, where he's setting up the false trinity in imitation of God with the Antichrist and the false prophet and the beast. It's a false trinity. It's a fake trinity. It's an imitation of what God has done. Same thing here. They can only imitate what Moses has done through God, or what God has done through Moses. They can't change it. They can't make the frogs go away. So this is an instance of God introducing himself to Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh, well, his priests can make more frogs come up, but they're only making a bad situation worse. Right now, Cheryl likes frogs. Y'all know my Cheryl loves frogs. We have 3 frogs that live in a little tiny pond right off our porch, and they're barking all night at each other. Cheryl loves frogs. I like frogs when their back legs are fried up a little bit. I like them. Me and my daddy used to go frog gigging. My mama, believe it or not, would fry up frog legs. They hop in the pan when you cook them. They're fun to do. I like frog legs. Anybody else like frog legs? Anybody else eat frog legs? I know Terry has. I know my mother has. Jim probably has.
Never tried it.
You should.
Well, maybe when Linda comes and visit us, she can bring some frog legs.
Oh, she's not cooking frogs anymore. I can promise you she ain't gonna cook none now. I'll cook them for you. They're good. They taste like a fishy chicken. That's what they taste like. So, and I like fish. I like chicken, so it's okay. Where was I? Okay, but here's the thing.
Cheryl loves frogs. That's where you're at.
Cheryl loves frogs, but even Cheryl would get tired of frogs if they were everywhere. If they were in the house, if you went to crawl into bed at night and your feet come up on some slimy cold frog, this is not a pleasant thing. In essence, God is saying, oh, you like frogs? Here you go. I'll give you frogs. But he's doing so for a very specific reason. He's not making a joke of this, but because the frog was sacred to the Egyptians, and Pharaoh was forced to request that God would take care of the problem himself. Pharaoh can't do it. Pharaoh's priest can't do it. So Pharaoh is recognizing that this is from God, and if he sent it, then he can take care of the problems. But what God does with the frogs, because God could have ordered the frogs to go away. God could have said to all the frogs, jump back in the river. Right? That's how they come out. He could have sent them back that way. But what does he do instead? And it's very, very important. He kills the frogs. Remember, the Egyptians were not to harm a frog. They were not to kill a frog. It was, if they intentionally killed a frog, it brought instant death penalty. Even if you inadvertently killed a frog, you were subject to the death penalty. If that's what the higher ups, except because they were forbidden from killing frogs because they were sacred. God is showing them they're not sacred at all. He killed all the frogs. Can you imagine the stench? The scripture in the original language said they put them in heaps and heaps, which is a way in the Hebrew to emphasize something. Great big heaps of dead, stinking, nasty frogs that they had to go and clean up themselves. God didn't make it easy for them. But what he's doing is showing the nation of Israel there's no such thing as a frog god, guys. You know, you can go to the Egyptian Museum and you can see a picture of Heka. It's a woman's body with a frog's face, frog head. It's one of the silliest looking things you ever see, but no, they've got some more sillier looking ones. But that's what God is doing. He's systematically destroying their belief in the Egyptian gods, and at the same time showing himself to be superior over these gods. Matter of fact, in chapter 12, when he's talking about the Passover, He gives Moses the Passover instructions and tells Moses what he's going to do. He encapsulates everything that has happened in the 10 Commandments in verse 12 of chapter 12 with a statement in there that says, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of the Egyptians. So that's the purpose. He's bringing judgment on not just the Egyptians, but on the gods of the Egyptians. That indicates to us that just like most false gods, I would dare say all false gods that have ever existed throughout history, there is a demonic force or spirit behind it. Remember when Daniel is praying and God sends an angel to Daniel, and he is withstood by the prince of Persia, what the demon who has responsibility for the area of Persia, until Michael comes to help him. 21 days. That demon holds off God's messenger angel until the archangel Michael comes and battles that other evil angel. See, there are dark spiritual powers behind all of the false prophets, all of the false teachers, all of the false religions. Everybody remember the story of Muhammad and how we got Islam? Muhammad is in a cave and suddenly there's appears to him. Muhammad thought it was a demon. He was frightened. Demon starts talking to him. Muhammad goes and tells his wife, who was much older than Muhammad. And she convinces Muhammad, no, that wasn't a demon, it was an angel. Go back and talk to the angel. Yes, it was a demon that appeared to Muhammad, right? Mormonism, right? Supposedly the angel Moroni gave some magic rocks that you could interpret when you put them in a hat and put your head in the hat. That's how we get the Book of Mormon, by the way, if you didn't know. Some magic rocks in a hat. My point is, all of the false religions have one of Satan's demons, one of Satan's followers, ultimately spiritually behind it, imitating and confusing the true religion of God, the true God. Remember, that's what the priest could only imitate what Satan's doing. He didn't come up with anything new, right? They didn't say, oh, Moses, watch this then. You turned it into a snake. I'm going to turn mine into a badger. No, they can only imitate what God did, and same thing with Satan. And that's what all false religions are. It's imitating a religion so that it will turn the object of worship from the one true God to anything other. But behind those religions, behind Islam, behind Jainism, behind Buddhism, whatever, all of them have a spiritual being that originated them and is behind them, that is enforcing them and driving them on. So that's what God is doing with the plagues. He's going to systematically bring judgment, not only on the nation of Egypt, but on those demons who have set up these false gods and false religions. So that's the plague of the frogs. Anybody got questions about frogs? Anybody hungry for frog legs now?
No.
I bet Terry's got some bullfrogs we could gig for Christian. He wants some frog. He wants to try them, Terry.
You want to try them? Tastes like chicken.
They taste like fishy chicken. They do. Chicken with a little fish flavor on them. Love them. They're good. Cheryl won't let me eat them, though, or she won't let me cook them. All right, let's move on to the third plague. Now, the ESV, which I'm using, says gnats. I think the NASB and some of the newer versions, the ones based off the Greek Septuagint, use the word gnats. The King James, the New King James, is going to call them lice. I think lice is a better translation because of the word, the underlying word in the Hebrew. The underlying word in the Hebrew is king, right? And it actually comes from the word for vine, grapevine or vineyard. But that part of the grapevine, you know how a grapevine, it latches on to something when a vine is growing, it latches on with those little curly cues, right? So the word that is translated here is taken from that word to latch or to attach. So gnats don't attach. Now, the honest truth is nobody knows what animals we're talking about in this one and the next plague. We don't know because the Hebrew doesn't translate the animal. It just says the latching, the latching animal, right? So my thought is that lice fits better with what's going on, because it doesn't matter. The god Geb is the one that God is going to confront here. The god Geb, G-E-B, Geb, was the god of the earth. He was the one they would bring sacrifices to in thanks for the produce that the earth produced, for the good things that the earth brought forth. They attributed that to Geb, right? The earth brings forth these good things. So we have a god. His sister was the goddess of the sky, and they're often pictured together, forming like a big triangle. She's up there, he's down here at the earth. He was the god of the earth, she's the god of the sky. But they worship Geb as one of their major gods, and they revered him because he was thought responsible to be the one responsible for the crop growth and the things that the earth produced, for the trees, for the fruit, for all of the things of the earth. Geb was the one who was thought to be responsible. So keep that in mind as we read what God has Moses do. Notice also, there's no warning to Pharaoh on this one. In the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th, there's no warning given, right? We have a progressive warning. The first one, God gives Pharaoh the opportunity to avoid all this, if you'll recall, before he turned the water into to blood. The second one, he just simply announces to Pharaoh what he's going to do. Hey, I want you to let my people go, but if you don't, I'm going to run you over with frogs. Here, there's not even a warning. He doesn't send Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh. There's a progressiveness in the judgment of God that we're seeing. So then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. And they did so. And Aaron stretched out his hand and his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth made gnats in all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. There were gnats on man and beast. And then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Now, the reason I say lice is the best translation, because the root word means to latch, and that's what lice do. Nevertheless, it's going to be a biting or a stinging insect. The word gnats comes in the newer translations, because in the Greek, the word gnat is what we translate, the Greek that we translate into the word gnat was used for a variety of the small stinging animals. Oftentimes it was used to describe mosquitoes in the Greek. So I don't know why they chose gnats. To me, it just seems like the worst one of the bunch to choose. It could have been bees. It could have been mosquitoes. It could have been sandflies. It could have been blowflies. It could have been, there's other different types of biting flies or whatever, little flying insects. But I think the word latch tells me that it should be lice, because some of the oldest Jewish commentaries actually say it's lice. But why do I say that? Because remember what God is doing. He's attacking their whole religious system. You remember, you see pictures of the Egyptians, you see movies or whatever, 10 Commandments or whatever. How do they depict Egyptians? Bald. They've removed all body hair, especially the priest and the pharaohs removed all their body hair. They plucked it out. That must have been very, very painful, because, I pull an eyebrow hair once in a while, or I pull a nose hair out. Man, my toes are wiggling. It's hurting so bad, but they're pulling every hair they got out, right? It was for a reason. They were extremely cleanliness conscious, especially the ruling class. They detested lice. They detested unclean things, right? There was a whole set of rituals that they had to go through, specifically the priest. They had to go through a whole set of rituals to make themselves clean before they could even go into their temples to perform their duties. So now God is sending an infestation of lice, so none of them's clean. Pluck all the hair you want, you're still covered in lice, right? You're still covered in lice. Guess what that also means? The priests can't even go about their priestly duties. They can't go perform their rituals because they're now unclean. There's nothing they can do. God is saying your whole religious system is meaningless. You can't do anything. I'm in control. And this is the first of the plagues that they can't replicate, right? They try by their secret arts, but they can't make the ground turn into these lice or these insects, but it's an attack on Geb, who is the one who was supposed to bring good things from the earth. So God has Aaron strike the earth and out pop these pests of whatever sort they were. I prefer lice, but it could be mosquitoes. That would actually be worse for me, I think. I hate mosquitoes. But whatever, they were tormented by these things. And we all know, even if it's just gnats, how many of us like gnats? You remember when you go out in the field and the gnats are there and it's just everywhere, right? Or you ever been to Alaska in the summer? You got to wear a net over your face because the mosquitoes are so thick. Same thing in parts of the Middle East. I mean, in the Far East. It's crazy. But for whatever the animal is, it's a reminder to the nation of Israel, the children of Israel, that what the Egyptians are doing with worshiping these gods are worthless. Because Geb cannot bring anything forth from the earth. He can't stop bad things coming from the earth as God has produced them. He can't do anything. Their priests, not only are they incapable of reversing this one or even replicating it, they're now rendered helpless in that they can't even go perform the rituals that the people would have expected of them when they're facing a calamity. They can't even go in the temples. Nobody can go in the temples. The gods are worthless. The gods have no purpose.
I have a question, Pastor Jeff.
Yep.
Did the gnats only mess with the Egyptians and their animals? Because when I read it, it says it that way. So I don't know if the Hebrews or the Israelites were bothered by them at all.
You know what? There are many of the commentators, most of the commentators that I have read, believe that the nation of Israel was also infected with the first three plagues. In other words, that the first three plagues also impacted the children of Israel, because it's not until his next one, the fourth plague, that God says he's going to separate the land of Goshen where the children of Israel live. And he says it for a very specific reason, so that you know they're my children. Because right now Pharaoh is thinking, hey, these are my people. You can't take my people. And so the next plague is going to separate, make a distinction between the nation of Egypt and the nation of Israel. Now, these don't specifically say, and yes, the way it reads is, the frogs are going to come up on you, Pharaoh, right? That's the first plague that affected Pharaoh. He had water, I'm sure, right? Because he would have somebody dig a well or whatever. But he wasn't personally affected by that blood, the water turning into blood, other than the stench and all of that. But the second one, God very pointedly says, you, Pharaoh, I'm going to overrun you and your people with frogs, right? Same thing here. He says, so the gnats become in all the land of Egypt. It doesn't specifically say that it affected the nation of Israel, but I tend to think that it did. And I tend to think that it did because God is also allowing them to see, hey, this is what you get for following these gods, right? Because many of them are following these gods. So, okay, this is what your God does for you. This is what that false God does for you, children of Israel. Do you really want to follow them? But from here on out, no, the children of Israel are exempt, beginning with this very next plague.
Thank you.
That's not to say that God didn't protect them from the plagues. It's ambiguous. I don't know, but very specifically, he says it here. Verse 20. Then the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning to present yourself to Pharaoh as he goes out to the water, and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go that they may serve me, or else if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. That's the reason he separates his people, so that you may know, Pharaoh, that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen. And the Lord did so. There came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh and into his servants' houses, throughout all the land of Egypt, and the land was ruined by the swarms of flies. Okay, let's talk about flies. Again, I told you we don't know what these things were because the Hebrew word is simply swarms. I'm going to send swarms, right? It's often used of swarms of various types of insect, but it doesn't lay out what it is. So I don't know where they get the idea of flies, because flies are not fun. I don't like flies, but flies don't really destroy your house or your people or your animals, do they? They irritate you. I mean, they can bring diseases and all that, but they, they're basically harmless. They're just nasty and stinking, and I'll kill everyone I see. And I'll even leave spiders alive so they can kill the flies. Cheryl is not happy about that, but if I have a good spider that's got a good web, I'm not touching it. Kill them mosquitoes and flies. So again, I can give you my opinion on what I think it is. Okay. I think it is probably a dung beetle. These swarms of flying dung beetle. Everybody know what a scarab beetle or a dung beetle is and what it does? It rolls animal dung in little balls and pushes it along. The Egyptians thought that the dung beetle was the one who was pushing the sun along the sky, like he would push his little dung ball. And they were thought to be miraculous because they would see dung beetles climbing out of these balls of dung. Well, what happens is a dung beetle rolls up a ball of animal dung and lays its eggs in it. And so the eggs hatch and start eating the dung, and they come out of the dung. This is a direct confrontation with the god Kefi. Kefi was the god of the insects. And if you look at a picture of Kefi, you can Google it, you'll see a man standing with the face of a dung beetle. That's sillier looking than the frog one, because the dung beetle ain't even got eyes. You're just looking at the back of a dung beetle, right? It's the god of the insects, Kefi. So they worship the god Kefi as the one who was responsible for the sun traversing the sky, as for the one who was responsible for bringing all the good insects to them, the honeybees and such that would pollinate. Kefi was a god that they revered. So I believe God is saying, oh, you like that dung beetle god? Here you go. Because something about dung beetles, they have these big scissor things on the end of their snout that they maneuver the dungs with. But they also do something else. They eat through wood. They saw through wood with those things. They like wood. They're not like termites who eating woods, but for some reason, they will destroy things that are made of wood. So God is saying to Pharaoh and his people, okay, here you go. You worship a stupid dung beetle. I'll destroy the nation of Israel with this dung beetle. I'll destroy the nation of Israel with this dung beetle. In Psalm 78, 45, let me misquote. It is Psalm 78.
It's 45.
Yeah, 45. He sent among them swarms. Again, I don't know why they add up flies. If you look at the King James, it'll be in italics because it's not in the original. But he says he sent among them swarms which devoured them. Well, that's exactly what a dung beetle would have done. We know it's not locusts because those come later. So regardless, it's a different animal than we have dealt with previously for a different purpose to defeat a different god. Whether it is actually a swarm of dung beetles or not is really not important, because it was aimed at the god Kefi, who was presented with the head of a dung beetle. But he was the god of the insects and the small flying things, the small creatures. So God sends them at you. Like a dung beetle? Here you go. Have some dung beetles. Or you like these insects? Here you go. Have all you can stand. Then Pharaoh, in verse 25, called Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses said, it would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? Okay. Number one, Pharaoh wants him to compromise. That's what sinners always do with God, isn't it? They want to compromise with God. That's what false teachers do. That's what false religions do. They want to compromise with God, right? That's what Islam does. Oh, yeah, we believe Jesus was a prophet. right? But he's not the son of God. I mean, come on, right? It's what Jehovah's Witnesses do. Well, yes, we believe Jesus is the Savior, but he's not God. You know, he's a step below God. It's what the Mormons do. They want to compromise with religion. That's what Pharaoh's trying to do. Okay, you can sacrifice, but don't go outside the land. Just compromise. Just stay here. But we cannot compromise with sin. God will not let us compromise with sin. More than that, what they were going to sacrifice was a live animal, specifically an ox or a goat. I mean, an ox or a bull. Well, we're going to see later, those are sacred to the Egyptians. You didn't sacrifice those, right? That would have been an abomination to the eyes of the Egyptians. So Moses says, no, we're not going to compromise. He says, verse 27, we must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you must not go very far away. Plead for me. Then Moses said, behold, I am going out from you, and I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord did as Moses asked and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained, but Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. So Pharaoh, we see Pharaoh's heart getting progressively harder, even though God is revealing more of himself to Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't even bother with his priests this time, with his magicians. They've been set aside. He understands they have no power against this God. But he immediately calls Moses, okay, I'll give in. I'll let you go. Don't go far, because I still want you back. You know, I still want to be able to keep my eye on you, but I'll let you go. And Moses said, all right, I'm going to go pray to God, and you're going to know it's God because he's going to remove him tomorrow, all of them. But be careful, Pharaoh. Don't try to cheat God again. Right? It's the same thing. Our hearts can get hard if we just keep repeatedly refusing God. So that's Exodus 8. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Not too much in there controversial, I hope. Questions?
I had a quick